In Game of Thrones, the Unsullied are an army of eunuchs. Would eunuchs make acceptable soldiers in the real world, or is it fictional nonsense or a woke pun? What would such an army's strengths and weaknesses be? Thanks. This is from Echo.
Well, geez, I don't know. I mean, the thing about the Unsullied in Game of Thrones is that we don't know by what mechanism they were trained. And so we actually don't know what incentives drive them. We know what incentives have been removed from them. But Game of Thrones explores this trope in multiple places where it basically, I mean, Theon Greyjoy gets remanufactured as a mental slave of, I can't remember what
Ramsay.
Is it?
Ramsay Snow.
Yeah. But anyway, the idea that you could rebuild somebody by altering
and Varys
their
also.
incentive. I wanted to bring up Varys because.
But before you speak, so you're focusing entirely on incentives and whether or not it would sort of work coherently as an army behaviorally. I suspect, given some of Echo's previous questions, that she is at least as interested in the question of anatomy and physiology. And so it really depends on at what point this would-be army had these unfortunate surgeries done to them. That little boys who are castrated are not going to become warriors who are going to be able to actually win against actually intact male armies, right? If they were castrated after they'd gone through male puberty, they would have male anatomy and male physiology and physique and body mass and all of that. And yes, it would change somewhat at the point that they were no longer producing much testosterone on their own, but they would be built like men. Whereas you castrate a little boy and he's not going to end up being built like a man, and so it wouldn't be an effective army.
Right. And so in some sense, this goes back to your distinction between organizational and activational effects, which exactly. I think is if you wanted to invest somewhere in a piece of knowledge that would liberate you from all sorts of scientific nonsense, this would be a great place to do it. Mm-hmm. But then you also have the technological question, which is, okay, if you get the advantage of the organizational effects that make a masculinized army, mm-hmm. and then you get presumably the control that this question is predicated on
someone who wants to control an army.
They're wondering if such an army would work. So that's mm-hmm. what we're talking about.
Yeah.
The organizational effects create the masculinized body, which is better for fighting. The lack of the androgens being produced increases control. But then, technologically speaking, you can introduce and remove androgens at will, which allows even greater control. So if you imagine the Unsullied,
possible in modern times.
Right,
yeah.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. So the last thing I was going to say on this topic is that Martin, the author.
George R. R. Martin.
George R. R. Martin tells us something about what he actually thinks about this castration stuff, because he says, as people are talking about Varys in early seasons, that nobody trusts a eunuch, which is ironic because in some sense a eunuch should be more trustworthy by virtue of the fact that they're not being jerked around by their gonads. But Martin's point, if it's Martin's point, and I assume it is that the lack of this distortion of maleness makes the person less reliable because you don't know actually what they're after. That
got no clues to motive.
Right. Men can be relied upon to be after certain things, and a man who is not after those things is a mystery and therefore dangerous. Yep. So anyway, I don't know.
So an Unsullied army could, if they had masculinized bodies sufficiently enough to be adequate warriors, could actually be more confusing and surprising and therefore more powerful against intact male armies.
Yes, although in the case of the Unsullied, they are so well trained that even liberated, they are not the least bit liberated.
Right.
So anyway, I think Martin does a pretty good job of exploring this in mm-hmm. Game of Thrones, that, you have the full range from a completely free agent freed by the lack of gonads to completely subservient agents by virtue of the training regimen that accompanied castration.